Have you ever wondered how a war could last 100 years? Picture this. A time when kingdoms rise and fall, when alliances shift like sands in the wind, and when battles rage on for generations. This is not a tale of a single battle, but a saga of an enduring conflict that spanned over a century. The 100 Years' War. A name that evokes intrigue and bewilderment. Today, we delve into the events of the 100 Years' War, a conflict that spanned over a century. Our story begins in 1337, in a time of disputed succession. The Middle Ages, a period where kingdoms were vast and power was everything, and it was in this era that a conflict ignited, which would span for over 100 years. The 100 Years' War, as it came to be known, was not a single continuous conflict but rather a series of battles, skirmishes, and standoffs between two of Europe's most powerful kingdoms, England and France. The fuse of this long-lasting war was lit by a dispute over the French throne. The key players in this historical drama were the then King of England, Edward III, and the French monarchy. Edward III, a monarch with a formidable reputation, claimed the French crown as his own. His claim was rooted in the fact that his mother was a French princess, making him, in his eyes, the rightful heir. However, the French nobility had other plans. They invoked an old law known as the Salic Law, which stated that succession could not pass through a female line. This law effectively disqualified Edward and any other English claims to the throne. Instead, the crown went to Philip VI, a cousin of the previous French king, and a member of the House of Valois. Edward, however, was not one to back down easily. He rejected the French nobility's decision and declared himself the rightful King of France. This dispute over succession sparked a conflict that would reverberate through the centuries, shaping the course of European history. The initial battles of the 100 Years' War were fought on both land and sea, with both sides eager to assert their dominance. These early confrontations were marked by strategic chess moves as both England and France sought to outmaneuver each other. The English longbowmen and the French knights became symbols of this war, embodying the military tactics and strategies of the time. Thus, the stage was set for a war that would last generations. The 100 Years' War was not just about a throne, but about national identity, power, and the very nature of medieval warfare. It was a conflict that would leave an indelible mark on both England and France, forever changing the face of Europe. As the years rolled on, the war took many twists and turns. The 100 Years' War was not a continuous conflict but a series of intermittent clashes separated by tense periods of peace. The major battles and turning points of this war were as unpredictable as they were brutal, and they changed the course of history in ways that still resonate today. Let's consider the Battle of Crécy, which took place in the summer of 1346. It was a turning point that marked a shift in military strategy and technology. The English longbowmen proved their mettle that day, cutting down the French knights with a hail of arrows. The battle showed that an organized force of commoners could decimate a chivalric army, shattering the myth of knightly invincibility. Then, a year later, the Siege of Calais began. Edward III of England laid siege to this French port city for over a year, starving out the inhabitants until they had no choice but to surrender. The capture of Calais gave the English a strategic foothold in France, and it remained under English control for more than 2 centuries. But one must remember that the war was not just a series of English victories. The French had their share of triumphs as well. The Battle of Poitiers, for example, saw the French king, John II, captured and held for ransom, setting the stage for a period of internal strife and chaos in France. And yet these battles were not the only significant events. There were also periods of relative peace, negotiations, treaties, and even a pandemic, the Black Death, that swept through both nations, further complicating the conflict and causing immeasurable suffering. The war ebbed and flowed like this for over a century, with victories and losses on both sides. It was marked by moments of triumph and despair, of bravery and fear, of hope and desperation. The 100 Years' War was more than just a conflict. It was an era that reshaped the social, political, and military landscape of Europe. Yet, despite the bloodshed and turmoil, neither side was willing to concede defeat. In the midst of despair, a beacon of hope emerged in the form of a young peasant girl. A heroine would rise from the most unlikely of places, a farm in Domremy, a small village in northeastern France. Her name was Joan of Arc, and she would become a symbol of French resistance during the 100 Years' War. Born into a world of conflict and uncertainty, Joan was not a trained soldier, an experienced general, or a cunning diplomat. She was a young woman, with an unwavering faith and a divine mission. Claiming to have received visions from saints, Joan believed she was chosen to lead France to victory. Her impact on the war was profound. Joan's leadership during the siege of Orléans in the spring of 1429 was a pivotal moment in the war. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the French forces under Joan's guidance managed to lift the English siege in just 9 days. This victory not only boosted the morale of the French troops, but also marked a significant turning point in the war. Joan's story, however, is not just one of victory, but also of sacrifice. Captured by the English in 1430, she was put on trial for heresy. Despite facing a biased court with little chance of acquittal, Joan maintained her convictions. She was ultimately sentenced to death and was burned at the stake, becoming a martyr at the tender age of 19. Yet Joan's legacy would not be extinguished with her life. Her courage and conviction inspired the French to continue their fight, and her martyrdom became a rallying cry for the nation. The girl who had once tended sheep in a small village had become a symbol of French resistance, a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. Joan's sacrifice would not be in vain as the tide of war began to turn. Her story serves as a testament to the power of faith and the impact one person can have even in the face of overwhelming odds. Joan of Arc, the unlikely heroine of the Hundred Years' War, would forever be remembered in the annals of history. Finally, in 1453, the Hundred Years' War reached its inevitable conclusion. The end was marked by the Battle of Castillon, a significant event that proved to be the war's final major conflict. The English, in an attempt to reclaim their lost territories, met the French in battle near Castillon. However, the French, armed with their formidable artillery, managed to repel the English forces, marking a decisive victory. The Battle of Castillon is often hailed as a turning point in military history. It signaled the end of the era of knights and castles, and heralded the dawn of gunpowder and artillery. The French victory at Castillon not only marked the end of the Hundred Years' War, but also the beginning of a new era in warfare. Following this decisive defeat, the English were forced to retreat, leaving the French in control of the majority of their territories. The English faced significant losses, both in terms of manpower and morale. The war had taken its toll on the English, both at home and abroad. In 1475, the Treaty of Picquigny was signed, effectively bringing the conflict to a formal end. The treaty stipulated that the English would withdraw from their remaining holdings in France in exchange for a hefty pension from the French crown. This agreement marked a significant shift in the power dynamics between England and France. England, once a formidable adversary, was reduced to a mere player in the grand scheme of European politics, while France emerged as a dominant force in the region. And so, the Hundred Years' War, a conflict that had spanned generations, wreaked havoc on nations and forever changed the landscape of Europe, finally came to an end. It was a war that saw the rise and fall of empires, the emergence of new technologies, and the reshaping of political boundaries. Thus, after over a century of conflict, the Hundred Years' War came to a close. The repercussions of this monumental conflict would be felt for centuries to come, shaping the course of history in ways that were unimaginable at the time. The echoes of the Hundred Years' War resonate even today. This monumental conflict, spanning over a century, has left indelible marks on our world. It was not just a war of kings and kingdoms, but a crucible where the very nature of warfare itself was redefined. The bow and the sword gave way to the cannon and the firearm, changing the battlefield forever. The war saw the rise of professional armies and the decline of feudal levies, marking a significant shift in the military paradigm. These changes reverberated through the centuries, influencing conflicts to come. Beyond the battlefield, the Hundred Years' War played a pivotal role in forging national identities. This was a time when the concept of a nation was still nascent. The shared experiences of war, the common struggle, the triumphs and the losses, all served to solidify a sense of nationhood in both England and France. The war also left an indelible mark on English and French history. It shaped their political landscapes, their cultural narratives, and their collective memories. It gave rise to iconic figures like Joan of Arc and the Black Prince, and epic tales of heroism and treachery. The ripples of the Hundred Years' War can still be felt today, in the stories we tell, the nations we live in, and the world we inhabit. The Hundred Years' War, a century-long conflict that shaped the course of history.